give us the impression that we're making choices, while those choices are being fundamentally dictated. I'll give you an example. If you're hungry and I give you the choice between an apple and a cake, I could say to you, there you go, you can make a totally free choice, no pressure, nothing. Do you want the apple or do you want the cake? Free choice. Oh yeah, it's good to be free, I've got a free choice. I'll have the apple. But of course, the apple or the cake are not the only choices. There are endless choices of what to eat. And this method is applied particularly to those choices of perception that really matter. So, what about the choice of who we are, the nature of what we are, and the nature of the reality that we are experiencing? Basically, the system is giving us a single choice between this world is all there is, life's a bitch and then you die, science, what passes for it, and there's a God you must obey, you must do as you're told if you're going to make it to heaven. And that's another thing. When it comes to the continuation of life or not, it's a choice between non-existence and joining this God under different names, different religions, in heaven. And so we're stuck with a choice between God and non-existence at the end of this period we call life. And we are given the choice, even if people believe that life continues, which it patently does, hello, between God's heaven and hell, hellfire. And yet, that is not the only choice. They just want us to think it is, because both have a massive effect in controlling people and limiting, suppressing their sense of the possible. Everything is black and white. Do you want black? Hellfire. Or do you want white? Heaven. As if that's the only choice. So what we're looking at is religion has hijacked the perception of the afterlife, because overwhelmingly that's on its terms. And what we bravely call science has hijacked non-existence after what we call death. And there are other explanations which you rarely see in the media or in the education system. And I got on this journey, which has taken me through the last quarter of a century, because I started to realize that there were other explanations for life, reality, that were very credible and supportive by the evidence. And so I asked, why aren't these concepts talked about in the schools? Why aren't they talked about in the media? Why isn't science looking at them in the mainstream? And the answer that came back as I progressed with this is that they were being systematically suppressed. And from that, I asked, well, what else is being systematically suppressed? And I walked into this massive panorama of global conspiracy and manipulation that I've been uncovering ever since. These other explanations for the nature of self and the nature of life, the nature of reality, are suppressed because an understanding of them would set us free from the program, set us free from the system and its perception, deception, manipulations. And so they are dismissed as psychobabble, pseudoscience, even though the basis of them is supported fundamentally by what we call quantum physics, which is a branch of mainstream science, that mainstream science has to acknowledge exists, but cracks on as if it doesn't when it comes to its own discipline. So this theme came to me over the last few days when I read an article in a British newspaper which was headed, "In an ever more irreligious age, the number of us who believe in heaven," again, here we go, heaven, Christian heaven, Muslim heaven, religious heaven, as if that's the only thing that can exist, if anything does, after death. That the number of us who believe in heaven is going up. We asked distinguished thinkers, why do even atheists still believe in life after death? And here's the first one, a guy called A.N. Wilson, an author and biographer of Jesus. It must have been a challenge. "We should not be surprised," he said, "that while the number of religious believers seems to have fallen, the number of believers in the afterlife has actually risen." And once again, there's this assumed connection that religious believers have fallen and the number of believers in the afterlife has risen. And that's a kind of what's going on when actually you don't have to be a religious believer to believe in an afterlife, a continuation of life, in fact. But that's the assumption made. So when non-religious believers believe in an afterlife, it's like this article, it's all about. What's going on? That's strange. It's not strange at all, as I'll come to. So Wilson goes on. Selfishness is at the core of modern culture. We are encouraged to believe that our own feelings should be paramount, that we should nurse grievances, feel sorry for ourselves, pick at old childhood wounds, blame our parents, our schools, our financial circumstances for our misfortunes, but never blame ourselves. Well, there's some truth in that, but then comes the next question, what the heck has that got to do with a belief in the afterlife? We go on. Since all the great religions teach the opposite, Wilson says, that wisdom only comes about through a conquest of selfishness, it is not surprising that our modern culture, fed by psychobabble, there we go, should wish to take leave of religion. Religions teach that wisdom only comes about through the conquest of selfishness. Well, maybe here and there they do, but they don't practice it most of the time, do they? Yet, he says, belief in an afterlife is consoling to those narcissists. You've got to be a narcissist to believe in the afterlife if you don't believe in religion. Who cannot imagine a future that does not contain them, preferably for all eternity. Once this is appreciated, you will understand why the me culture would wish to discard all the difficult bits of religion, but hold on to the prize at the end. We do not wish to deny our carnal appetites and to curb our selfishness, but that is not going to stand in the way of our insisting that we will live forever. Must invite him to dinner. Then we got A.C. Grayling, philosopher and master of New College of the Humanities. Belief in an afterlife, he says, arises from several powerful psychological causes. One is the sheer incredulity with which people contemplate the suggestion that the vivid consciousness that we experience can completely vanish when bodily functions cease. How can the rich array of our thoughts, feelings, memories, and perceptions be extinguished? Well, apparently, according to Grayling, they can. The fact that we have long periods of unconsciousness when we are asleep should remind us that consciousness is not an uninterrupted phenomenon, and its interruptions are evidence that it might well not be a permanent one either. Well, what about all the dreams that we have when we are not consciously awake? And how about our point of attention, our point of experience might move to other levels of reality during sleep, which the conscious mind is not directly experiencing? Another question worth contemplating. Then we've got Colin Blakemore, professor of neuroscience. The afterlife, he says. I could never get my head around those Renaissance images of men with wings and weightless thrones floating in fluffy clouds. How did the anti-gravity bit work? It was symbolic, mate. And most worrying of all, what did the lucky people who qualified to get in do all day? What would they talk about? Would there be a decent theatre? And books to read? And remember, it's forever. It all seems so preposterous, even rather frightening, he says. You don't need the fear of God to be a moral person, and you don't need the presence of an intelligent designer to explain the universe. See, human perception, particularly in the program, is so squeezed in terms of its sense of the possible that it perceives life continuing after this reality in other realities on the basis of other realities being like this reality. So the concept is that if life continues, then, well, what about the theatres? Have they got theatres? Have they got books? As if the world that we're experiencing is the only world of possibility. And these people are dictating the official version of reality of mainstream science. We're living in an infinite state of all possibility. This is just one possibility, going to the theatre and reading a book. Anyway, Blakemore says, so why cling to the improbable idea of eternal life? The improbable idea of eternal life. Is there anything more improbable than the way science explains how this universe came into existence through the so-called and illusory, ludicrous Big Bang? This is a definition of the Big Bang. According to the standard Big Bang model, the universe was born during a period of inflation that began about 13.7 billion years ago. Couldn't be more precise, could you? This is the best bit, like a rapidly expanding balloon, it swelled from a size smaller than an electron to nearly its current size, I kid you not, within a tiny fraction of a second. And this guy Blakemore says that, or asks the question, why we should cling to the improbable idea of eternal life. It's like the guy called Terence McKenna said, a brilliant quote, "Give us one free miracle and we'll explain the rest." That's the Big Bang. So, also in this article is the view of the Assistant Secretary General of the Muslim Council. And here he says, for many Muslims, this report would be puzzling. Just as in Judaism and Christianity, belief and reliance in God are the central pathway to a successful afterlife. Indeed, while we are promised ample material rewards in heaven, our religious traditions place a greater value on the fact that after life we would be closer to God. That is our ultimate salvation. Who says all that? Somebody that wrote a book once. Same with all these religions. I think, what was that great line that the great American comedian Bill Hicks came up with about religion, where they're poring over these religious texts and deciding what they mean. I think what God meant to say. I mean, these books were written by human beings, for goodness sake. But no, it's all true. No, there can't be any other alternative. He goes on, I am also struck by the suggestion that increasing feelings of entitlement may be fueling a rise in believing in life after death despite not accepting religion or God. You see again, the equation or the connection between believing in religion and there being an afterlife and believing in the afterlife. You can't believe in one and not accept religion. Crazy, crazy stuff. This is worrying, really. I hadn't felt that. Especially if it leads, as academics suggest, to less spirituality and more individualism. Now, they talk about spirituality. Oh, we must be more spiritual. Here's definitions of spirituality. The quality or state of being concerned with religion or religious matters. The quality or state of being spiritual, which is being concerned with religion or religious matters. Something that in ecclesiastical law belongs to the church or to a cleric. See, they've hijacked spirituality. Sensitivity or attachment to religious values. The quality or state of being spiritual, which is the sensitivity or attachment to religious values, and so it goes on. He goes and continues, however, before the afterlife, we have this worldly life to cherish, enjoy, and in which to do good works. For those with a religious belief, it is also a time to cultivate and plan for a successful harvest after death. Now, this is another aspect of this whole religion, God thing. And you see it in politics in exactly the same way. It's the same scam. What you're looking for, the reward, is always tomorrow. Do what religion says now. Do what these men in frocks say now. And then you'll have your reward tomorrow. Oh, accept austerity now, say the politicians. Accept austerity now, and you'll have the reward tomorrow. It's like sitting on a carousel horse trying to catch the one in front. It's always tomorrow. It's always too far. It's never now. It's never today. All putting you off so to keep you in line and to keep you doing what they say you must do to get your reward tomorrow. The Quran teaches, he says, and for the Quran, see the Bible, see all of them. It teaches us how to ask from God, quote, "Our God, grant us goodness in this world and goodness in the hereafter, and save us from the punishment of the fire." God threatens you with the punishment of the fire if you don't do what he says, because he loves you. I'm always fascinated, he concludes, by how God wants us to first ask for this life and then for the afterlife. Fascinated. Personally, I'm bewildered. I think he says we call this the best of both worlds. I might call it the worst. But the last one here is by someone called Libby Purvis. She's a BBC radio presenter. And she's nearer the mark, shall we say. This is what she said. "I was a convent girl raised to believe in the four last things: death, judgment, heaven, and hell." See, give them simple choices, either that or non-existence, and you got them either way. The Catholicism was, on my mother's side, counterbalanced by my father being a lapsed Scottish Presbyterian turned atheist. So there were 2 points of view to choose from, which is handy for a child. Not what the system wants, though. Ooh, don't give them choices. They might make the wrong one. She says, "But my real luck was reading C.S. Lewis, author of the Narnia books, Christian fables for children." I think they were more than Christian fables, actually, and went much deeper than that. "In the last battle, the good characters and the wicked ones end up in the same place," she says, "but the brave, kindly ones see a marvellous new country spreading out around them, while the baddies simply can't see it. It's called creating your own reality, which can be explained even through quantum physics," how it's done. Whenever the kind ones try to persuade them, they remain convinced they are still in a cramped hut. In his adult book, The Great Divorce, Lewis expands on this idea that hell is just the inability to see or appreciate goodness, a clenched, furious habit of selfishness. Heaven and God, being the ultimate good thing, can only be perceived and enjoyed if you have tried to follow goodness. And we come back to creating your own reality. What you give out, you get back. It's called cause and effect on one level of this existence. Today, she says, being older and grumpier, I mainly reflect that there is a curious satisfaction in the fact that we can't know what happens after death. Professor Richard Dawkins, the evolutionary biologist and militant atheist, he's actually a religious figure, Dawkins. He castigates religion, official religion, in-your-face religion, but he promotes his own religion of scientism and atheism in the same way as any priest. But they can't see that they're mirrors of each other, just having a different name for their religion. One's called science or scientism, the other one's called Islam or Christianity or Hinduism or whatever. Purvis goes on that they can't prove there's no afterlife. Clerics can't prove that there is. Stalemate. But she concludes the Lewis idea lingers on, that whatever happens to our consciousness next, if indeed there is a next, depends on how we try to live on earth. We make our own heaven. We may not have to fear hellfire, but there is a sneaking feeling that if you cultivate a nasty nature, you'll have to go on living with it. So what about another explanation for life? The one that's marginalized, suppressed, ridiculed. How about that what we are is pure awareness, simply a state of being aware. And these bodies, vehicles, are to allow our awareness to experience different realities. We get so caught in the world that we can see that we can't see that the real self is in the world of the unseen. And it's simply about frequency. Even mainstream science will tell you that of the mass matter that exists, etc., energy, in the observable universe, our eyes can perceive only a tiny, tiny fraction of it. Some say as low as 0.005% of what exists in the known universe is all that we call the electromagnetic spectrum. Some say a bit more, but not much. So something like 0.005% of what exists in the known universe is the electromagnetic spectrum. Visible light, which is the only part of that 0.005% that we can actually see as a world, only a fraction of that 0.005% can we actually see. And yet science pontificates about how everything is. Religion pontificates about how everything is from only the perspective of that fraction of the 0.005%. Why can we only see that ludicrously small range of frequency? Because the body can only, which I call a biological computer, in fact I saw a scientist calling it a biological computer recently, the biological computer, the body, can only decode into a visual reality that tiny, tiny band of frequency. And if we think that despite the tiny amount of reality that we can perceive, that we can make definite claims that there is no afterlife, then that's just plainly ridiculous and unbelievably arrogant. There is an infinity of existence beyond this tiny fraction of visual reality that we can perceive. And what's happening is our true self, pure awareness, the state of being aware, is experiencing, for what we call a human life, that tiny range of frequency. And this is why when people have what are known as near-death experiences, when they leave the body, when the body dies and then is revived, they come back in their fantastic numbers now and describe a reality that was vastly different to the one we are experiencing. A reality in which past, present, and future was all happening in the same moment, the same now, in which they could perceive multiple realities at the same time, and in which the world that they experienced of enormous expansion of awareness, of consciousness, was beyond words dramatically different to the tiny range of frequencies that we are experiencing through this biological computer in what we call a human life. Consciousness, awareness, is indestructible. It may change, and it's constantly changing. You access that amount of awareness, you're going to have the perception of a P. You expand your awareness, you're going to have a massively expanded sense of reality. And what the system wants to do, the program, is focus that attention into the smallest possible limitation, so we become easy to control. And that is the basis of why people are offered the "this world is all there is, life's a bitch and then you die" science, "we're just a cosmic accident," or "you've got to do as you're told and behave and do what God wants so that you'll have your reward tomorrow." This is why reality, and I expand on it massively in the books and the talks, this is why the reality that I've very briefly outlined is not taught in the schools, is not seen in the media, is not explored by the main body of mainstream science, because they don't want us to think about that. They don't want us to perceive that we could be infinite awareness having an experience. And in the title of my latest book, the person we think we are, our name, our income bracket, our race, our religion, whatever, is a phantom self, not the real self. And what we call our name, our life story, our race, our religion, our income bracket, is not who we are. It is who our infinite awareness is experiencing. That's all. David Icke is not me. He's an experience for the infinite me currently. And it's the same with everyone else. And so, in terms of the afterlife, there is no afterlife. And there is no before life. There is just life. And death is not the death of us. It's the end of the cycle for the vehicle, the body, the biological computer that has allowed the real us to experience this reality in what, like I say, we call a human life. So, maybe what this article is all about, how come more people are believing in an afterlife, yet at the same time less and less people are believing in religion? Maybe there is an answer to that. Maybe people are becoming more aware of their true self. Maybe it's because of intelligence in seeing the nonsense of the limitations of religion and science. Maybe humanity is starting to awaken from the program, or at least those who've rejected religion, rejected science, but still believe in the afterlife, or the continuation of life, as I would put it. But you rarely see that discussed in articles like that. Why? We must be in the program, or they can't control us. Because a scam it is. It's another movie. A horror movie, yes, but it's another movie designed to orchestrate events that eventually will allow the subjugation and control of the whole of the Middle East, and in the end, the whole of Africa. Now, this ISIS was supposed to have kind of started about 2004, but it was in April 2013 that it took the present name and started heading towards what it's doing now. And it's said that it is an outgrowth, if you like, from Al-Qaeda. And the propaganda is that it's so extreme, ISIS, that it was too extreme for Al-Qaeda. Now, they are trying to, or have spent all these years, seeking to sell us the lie that this Al-Qaeda organization was behind 9/11. And if you can get more extreme than doing what happened on that day, they didn't, but the propaganda wants us to believe that, then how extreme must this ISIS be, according to this propaganda, that it's too extreme for Al-Qaeda? Load of bloody rubbish. And let's go back to a base position here, in fact, a database position. And that is that there is no Al-Qaeda in the way that it is portrayed by Western propaganda, the way that it is described in terms of its structure. This is Robin Cook, former British Foreign Secretary, very soon before he died, actually. And he said this: throughout the 1980s, Osama bin Laden was armed by the CIA and funded by the Saudis to wage jihad against the Russian occupation of Afghanistan. Al-Qaeda, literally the database, was originally, he said, the computer file of the thousands of mujahideen who were recruited and trained with help from the CIA to defeat the Russians. Inexplicably, Cook says, and with disastrous consequences, it never appears to have occurred to Washington that once Russia was out of the way, bin Laden's organization would turn its attention to the West. Well, it's not inexplicable. It's how the game works. The idea is to create these terror groups, or in many cases, create the belief in these terror groups and how they operate, to justify, under the problem, reaction, solution scenario, create the problem, get the reaction, do something, then offer the solution to the problems you have created. Under the problem, reaction, solution technique, to justify intervention into countries because of terrorism, and justifying more and more freedoms and basic civil rights being taken away in your own country on the excuse of protecting the population from terrorism. And on this Al-Qaeda situation, here's Jason Burke, author of Al-Qaeda Casting a Shadow of Terror. He's talking on a BBC program called The Power of Nightmares. And that is, in many ways, problem, reaction, solution. The power of nightmares. Get people to experience or think they're experiencing a nightmare or potential nightmare, and then save them from the nightmare which you have created. Anyway, Jason Burke says this about Al-Qaeda. The idea, which is critical to the FBI's prosecution, that bin Laden ran a coherent organization with operatives and cells all around the world, of which you could be a member, is a myth, he said. There is no Al-Qaeda organization. There is no international network with a leader, with cadres who will unquestioningly obey orders, with tentacles that stretch out to sleeper cells in America, in Africa, in Europe. That idea of a coherent, structured terrorist network with an organized capability simply does not exist. But what he was talking about there was Al-Qaeda at that time. This ISIS situation is different. This is a new stage. This would appear to be a very organized network, extremely organized, immensely well funded. I mean, I've seen figures of maybe $2 billion they have at their disposal, and extremely well armed with American weaponry for reasons I'll come to. And here's a big piece in the Daily Mail newspaper this week. Jihadi Terror Group PLC. And the reason they call it PLC is because they've produced accounts, like annual accounts of a company, detailing finances, but also detailing all the murders they've done, the beheadings they've done, and all these horrors that they're carrying out. And it's just like a PLC has produced it. And this is a highly organized operation. And this is, like I say, a new stage. Now, one of the things that I've been writing about for many years is the fact that the plan was to create massive divide and rule of the Arab world, the Muslim world, through playing Shia Muslims off against the Sunnis, to create conflict and upheaval. And there's nothing like chaos to exploit your goals. The 33rd degree of Freemasonry has a motto: order ab chaos, order out of chaos. And that is problem, reaction, solution. Create the problem, create the chaos, then offer the order out of the chaos. But it's your order, your new order, your new structure of control. And what we see here with this ISIS group is that Sunni Shia schism being massively and blatantly exploited, because the ISIS group claim to be Sunni, and certainly Sunni Muslims believe that's the case, although some people question that, because some people say, well, actually behind it, and I would be one of them, is not even anything to do with Islam. But they are seen as Sunni, and they are attacking the Shia population of Iraq. And what's been kind of bewildering to a lot of people recently, and I understand it, is that after all this condemnation of Iran, and we ought to attack Iran, we ought to take the nuclear capability out and all that, suddenly in very recent times they've been talking about, well, maybe we ought to come to some agreement with Iran over what we do about this ISIS group. Well, the ISIS group are Sunni, and Iran is basically the center of the Shia world. 89% of Iranians are Shia Muslims. And so what it would seem to me is happening with Iran is there's an attempt to draw them into this situation with ISIS on the basis of protecting Shia Muslims from their attacks. And once they're drawn in, that whole conflict then ensues and they can't get out. Because what this whole thing is about is creating so much mayhem and upheaval in the Middle East, in that whole area, including the area all around Israel, which I'll get to in a minute, that eventually there is an intervention to protect people. And out of that comes what they've been working towards for a very, very, very long time. And that is World War III, the world designed, or the war designed to transform the world, even from what it is now in terms of freedom, into a global fascist dictatorship. So, what's going on with ISIS? Well, another part of this whole scenario is what's going on in Ukraine. It's no accident they're happening together, because what they want, as I've been again writing for years about, is they want to draw Russia and China in to a conflict with the West. That was basically what the World War III is designed to be. And what's happening now with Ukraine, now this fascist government, this neo-Nazi government is in power, controlled by the West, is that there's a front opening up there slowly but surely with Russia to take their attention and resources away from what's happening in the Middle East. So the plan is to create so much chaos and upheaval all across the Middle East and down into Africa by using these various terror groups to orchestrate the horrors that we're seeing, to justify the eventual intervention into those countries. And, you know, whether it's Boko Haram in Nigeria, and they're now moving into other countries as well, they go under different names, but they have the same, in the shadows, the same source of control and manipulation to the same goal, which is problem, upheaval, war, terror, solution, intervention to protect the people. But you'll note at the moment that although the United States, under multiple presidents, has, you know, been unable to contain itself in terms of wanting to bomb these and bomb them and all that, they're not talking about that now with this ISIS situation, even though, you know, it was their invasion along with Britain's Tony Blair that has actually created the ground, the situation, the environment for this to happen. They're not talking about any military intervention because, not yet, because they want this ISIS thing to move further on and for them to get a much greater foothold in that region so that a full-blown intervention can eventually come, not least on the premise of protecting Israel, which of course is in that very area of the Levant that this ISIS group says it wishes to turn into an extreme Muslim state. Another area of interest with ISIS is Syria, because they are in Syria fighting against the Assad regime. And so it's now so, see, people think that this is contradictory against that, and that's contradictory against that, but it's not. The thing that stops the contradictions is whatever suits the agenda is done. So in Syria, ISIS is doing what the US, Britain want. They're fighting, attacking the Assad regime, which they want to bring down. But in this is in the public arena, not in reality. I'm talking about here. But in Iraq, the same ISIS is now doing things which, in public, the Americans and the British, etc., the cabal, don't want to happen. But in fact, they want both of them to happen. They just condemn one for public consumption. ISIS is supporting the agenda by fighting Assad, and it's supporting the agenda by causing the mayhem in Iraq, because the idea is to create mayhem throughout the Middle East, and thus a problem reaction solution scenario. Now, another confirmation that ISIS is not what it seems is it's being funded by Saudi Arabia. I mean, who the heck does Saudi Arabia not fund so long as they are going to create terrorism and upheaval? And Qatar have been mentioned as well in terms of funding and support for ISIS. Now, both Qatar and the Saudis are 51st states of the United States, of which there are a legion. And so you have the United States condemning ISIS and what they're doing in Iraq, while their satellite states are helping to create it, as they indeed funded the rebels in Libya, which was just another situation where you fund, arm, and train rebels to terrorize the country and to attack the Gaddafi regime. And then when Gaddafi responds, he's killing his own people, and we have to go in and bomb city after city to protect the civilians from violence. It's all part of the same ongoing scenario. Now, the Iraq-Afghanistan occupation by the Americans never ended. It just took a different form. They may have taken a lot of the troops out, but the control didn't disappear. And they have replaced them with these private armies, these mercenary so-called security organizations, which answer to the Pentagon. They're just an arm of the military, but because they're called private and civilian organizations, then the Pentagon can do what it wants behind the cover that it's not really involved in this country at all, really. We pulled the troops out. And what this situation with ISIS will eventually allow them to do is to justify massive intervention, in effect World War III, to get rid of the terrorists from the Middle East, by which time they want this ISIS organization to be overrunning a very much larger area than they are now. And they're doing it. They're doing it with American weapons, because you can arm an organization directly. You can arm it secretly. And there's another option, which is what we're seeing here, is that you arm apparently someone else, in this case the Iraqi government, the Iraqi military, with vast amounts of state-of-the-art weapons, knowing that this group's coming because you're orchestrating it, training it, funding it. And as they overrun the Iraqi government forces, as they're doing currently, then all that American weaponry is theirs. And in fact, there are reports that ISIS have now got so much state-of-the-art weaponry and military vehicles, etc., that they don't need them all for Iraq. They're shipping them some into Syria to help with the fight against Assad. And this is a Fox News report. US-made Stinger missiles have likely fallen into ISIS hands, officials say. You do surprise me. US officials with access to the latest US intelligence on Iraq told Fox News it appears likely, probable, that US-made Stinger missiles have fallen into the hands of Sunni insurgents. It is possible that the Islamic State of Iraq and Syria, ISIS fighters, acquired them from army bases they have taken over in recent days. The Stinger missile is a shoulder-fired surface-to-air weapon that is used against aircraft. And ISIS forces, as they advance through Iraq, the report says, concerns have increased that more US-made weaponry can fall into the hands of the radical group, which is precisely what the plan is. According to a report from the West Point Combating Terrorism Center, the ISIS, quote, now possess scores of Iraqi military equipment originally provided by the United States, from Humvees and cargo vehicles to small arms. And this is another report that says ISIS has secured so many US-made vehicles, like I just mentioned, that they don't even need them all on the Iraq side of their new Islamic State. And reports say they're sending a number of US-made tanks, trucks and Humvees into Syria to be used by ISIS fighters on the Syrian front. Perhaps even more dangerous, it says US officials say it is probable that US-made anti-aircraft missiles are now in ISIS hands, meaning all air traffic in the region is in serious danger. And it's all orchestrated. Two birds, one stone. You provide them with the weapons to overrun Iraq, and you provide weaponry for those that you want to overthrow, Assad in Syria. And the timing's perfect. Headline: war industry stands to make billions off ISIS threat. I'm staggered. It says here, last month it was announced a few outstanding members of the military-industrial complex would stand to rake in around $1 billion if an arms sale to the Iraqi government was approved by Congress. Now, with what's going on in Iraq with this ISIS onslaught, do you reckon there's just a little bit of a chance that Congress might approve that? I think there probably is. And down here, it's talking about in December, the New York Times reported the Obama administration had provided the Iraqi military with 3 sensor-laden aerostat balloons, given 3 additional reconnaissance helicopters to the Iraqi military, and said it planned to send 48 Raven reconnaissance drones before the end of this year. In addition, the US said it would plan to deliver this fall F-16 fighters that Iraq has bought. If delivered ahead of schedule, the report says, in response to the current situation, there is a distinct possibility this military hardware will fall into the hands of ISIS, just as it is meant to. Now, in this situation, you also have screaming at you the name Israel. I'm doing this on Friday. You'll see it on the Sunday. But up to this point, as I speak, Israel's been remarkably quiet, from what I've seen anyway, on what's happening in Iraq. And yet you'd think they'd be kind of screaming very loudly indeed. They may well do, but they haven't yet. Because in this area that this ISIS terror group, with all this military hardware, wants to take over and turn into an extreme Islamic state, this Iraq, Syria, and the Levant, is Israel. And Israel, of course, has a phenomenal military capability, including a massive nuclear arsenal, all paid for by the United States. And the United States has said that it will intervene to protect Israel whenever it's under threat. Well, what's happening at the moment, as I speak, is the Americans' government is saying we're not bringing about military intervention in Iraq. And the reason for that is that they want ISIS to go further. But there's going to come a point in this story, if it unfolds as it currently is, where Israel is going to start coming under threat. And that will then justify a massive American intervention to protect our allies, and also the unleashing of the enormous military capability of Israel. And then you have a scenario for World War III. At least if, Syria starts getting overrun, Russia supporting Syria, China also has support for Syria, and here we go, and there we are. And it's not a coincidence that there is a concept, a plan called Greater Israel. And in 2013, Mako Chosadovsky of Global Research wrote an article about this, headed Greater Israel, the Zionist Plan for the Middle East. Now, he wrote this in 2013, and when you look at current events, it fits like the proverbial. It says, according to the founding father of Zionism, Theodor Herzl, the area of the Jewish state stretches, quote, from the brook of Egypt to the Euphrates. According to Rabbi Fitchman, the promised land extends from the river of Egypt up to the Euphrates in Iraq, of course. It includes parts of Syria and Lebanon. So you're looking at this Greater Israel scenario, and it's fitting this area of land, or much of it, that this ISIS group says it wants to take over. And he talks here in this article about the the plan to achieve this greater Israel consists of weakening and eventually fracturing neighboring Arab states as part of an Israeli expansionist project. And again, what are we seeing now in Iraq for a start, other than a fracturing? What are we seeing in Syria other than a fracturing? Greater Israel, the article says, would create a number of proxy states. It would include parts of Lebanon, Jordan, Syria, the Sinai, as well as parts of Iraq and Saudi Arabia. And he says Israeli strategists viewed Iraq as their biggest strategic challenge from an Arab state. This is why Iraq, he said, was outlined as the centerpiece to the balkanization of the Middle East and the Arab world. In Iraq, on the basis of the concepts of the Yinon plan, that's the plan to bring about the Greater Israel, Israeli strategists have called for the division of Iraq into a Kurdish state and two Arab states, one Shiite Muslims and the other Sunni Muslims. Well, we're very clearly seeing that unfolding with this ISIS scenario currently. The first step towards establishing this was a war between Iraq and Iran, which the Yinon plan discusses. Now, at the time, you'd think that, you know, a war between Iraq and Iran was pretty unlikely after the end of Saddam Hussein. But what you've got now is this Sunni insurgents by this ISIS group attacking Shia Muslims. And the idea is that you can bring Iran in to protect the Shia. And that then creates, in effect, a war between at least parts, the ISIS parts of Iraq and Iran. It's not impossible. The article goes on. The Atlantic in 2008 and the US Military's Armed Forces Journal in 2006, I mean, this is quite a few years ago now, both published widely circulated maps that closely followed the outline of the Yinon plan. Aside from a divided Iraq, the Yinon plan calls for a divided Lebanon, Egypt, and Syria. Well, Syria, it's not divided currently, is it? The partitioning of Iran, Turkey, Somalia, and Pakistan also fall into line with these views. The Yinon plan also calls for the dissolution in North Africa and forecasts it as starting from Egypt and then spilling over into Sudan, Libya, and the rest of the region. That's what's happened. And of course, in Libya, they removed Gaddafi, who would have probably caused them a lot of problems with what they're trying to do, but he's gone now. And the article says, viewed in this context, the war on Syria is part of the process of Israeli territorial expansion. Israeli intelligence, working hand in glove with the US, Turkey, and NATO, is directly supportive of al-Qaeda terrorist mercenaries inside Syria. And they're directly supportive of the ISIS ones as well. And says the Zionist project also requires the destabilization of Egypt. Well, that's not happened, has it? The creation of factional divisions within Egypt as instrumented by the Arab Spring. Then you ask the question, this ISIS group is supposed to be extreme Muslim, extreme Sunni Muslim, but are they? This is an article, is ISIS really Sunni? Not at all. And this is a quote from the Islamic scholar Dr. John Andrew Morrow. He says, a lot of so-called jihad, holy war, is not rooted in Islam, especially if you look at who's funding it, who's supporting it, who's behind it. Western powers have a long history of using jihadists and Islamists to further their own imperial ambitions. In terms of the foot soldiers, they may think they're fighting for Islam, but if you look closer, you find they're furthering the cause of the enemy. And, you know, this is very relevant when he's talking there about the foot soldiers. You know, people are so stupid. They're so controlled by their belief system, so full of their own need for omnipotence, that they will be putty in the hands of these manipulators. So they say, oh yes, the ISIS, we're for Sunni Muslims and a real kind of extreme Islamic state, Allah, Allah. And so, oh yeah, we'll fight for you, mate, yeah. Oh yeah, I've just seen it on Twitter, I'm going off fighting for this. And it's just a scam. It's just a front. Nothing to do with religion, it's to do with divide and bloody rule. And Dr. Morrow points out that much of ISIS's behavior is patently un-Islamic. He said that their terrorists love to film themselves committing war crimes that are forbidden by Islam, and they're proud to commit atrocities. They film it, they upload it to the internet, they have their own websites. In fact, this whole ISIS operation is not just extremely efficient and PLC in terms of money, but it's state of the art in terms of social media. This is a seriously well-funded and organized operation, and it's being orchestrated out of the West. Zaid Ahmed, a Sunni Muslim defense analyst from Pakistan, says ISIS and related terrorist groups are not Sunnis. He calls them heretics from his point of view. And he says that they are serving an anti-Islamic agenda. Yes, everything is inverted. Everything is inverted. The world's inverted. So, yeah, we're fighting for Islam. No, we're fighting to destroy it by doing this on behalf of those that wish to destroy it. Hamid argues that the ultra-radical groups destabilizing Pakistan, Syria, and Iraq have indeed stepped outside of Islam and are making war on Islam and Muslims on behalf of Zionism and imperialism. And that's exactly what they are doing, not just in the Middle East, but throughout, increasingly throughout Africa. But there's another aspect to this, the ISIS crisis. Interesting, isn't it? You get ISIS in the name, crisis. I'll come to ISIS in a minute. And that is justifying still more control, surveillance, loss of freedoms and civil liberties in the Western countries, who are trying to currently frighten the population with the nightmare of these terrorists, these ISIS terrorists who have been and are fighting in Iraq, coming back home, those that come from Britain or America, wherever, and bringing the terrorism back home and the Holy War back home to Britain and other European countries and North America, etc. I mean, that wasn't kind of predictable, was it? We've had in America this week, Lindsey Graham, Senator Lindsey Graham. This is a man who never opens his mouth unless he's speaking the words of the cabal that hold his strings. He's a mate of John McCain, ditto. And he's been talking this week about the probability of another 9/11 happening in the United States as a result of what's currently happening in the Middle East. And we've had David Cameron, the British Prime Minister, this is the headline, Iraq crisis, jihadists planning UK attacks, warns David Cameron. He's saying that the jihadists fighting in Iraq and Syria are planning attacks in the UK as the Iraqi government asks the US to launch airstrikes against militants. Jihadists are going to come back and cause mayhem here, he's talking about. And he said that he's insurgents from Iraq, Somalia, Nigeria, and Mali. I mean, how many bloody more? I mean, just that statement, insurgents from Iraq, Somalia, Nigeria, and Mali, you can see how it's spreading across the Middle East and Africa. And he said, as well as those in Syria, must be dealt with, or the problems will come back and hit us at home. And we've had this man who I don't use the word madness as a symbol. I use it literally. Tony Blair, who has been saying that the invasion of Iraq by Blair and Bush, based on known lies, is in no way responsible for what's happening now, when it actually created the very circumstances for which this could happen. And Cameron's saying that ministers are ensuring that intelligence, security and policing services were focused as sharply as they can be on this problem of, terrorism at home. And so what you're going to be seeing is more and more efforts to take away more and more freedoms on the basis of protecting the population from the terrorists which they have created. Now, ISIS. Symbolism is the language of this cabal, this network. They have their own language of symbolism, which they understand. And, you see the obvious ones like the all-seeing eye and the pyramid and all-seeing eye on the dollar bill and the lighted torch. These are all the obvious ones, but they have a whole language of symbolism, and they have their own religion. It's satanic religion, but it's a kind of religion with its gods and its goddesses, and one of them is called ISIS. Now, if you are a extreme Islamic terror group, why do you have a wording in your name that allows it to be broken down to the short-term ISIS? Why? I mean, you say, "Hey up, mate! No, this means ISIS. We better change the wording so it don't." But that's what has happened. And see, ISIS is the goddess. I'll get to some background in a second. But it's a goddess of darkness and chaos, which is exactly what is happening because of what ISIS is doing in Iraq. And that's another thing, isn't it? Have you noticed now, once you call this group ISIS, the goddess of these people, then you are pulling newsreaders and news reporters into using language like ISIS forces have taken over Mosul. ISIS is closing in on Baghdad. ISIS is doing this. ISIS is doing that. And they must be laughing their socks off as these news reports are read. ISIS is doing this. ISIS is going there. ISIS is claiming this. And this is an article on GnosticWarrior.com. ISIS, goddess of darkness and chaos. So the goddess Isis was also known to the Sumerians as Tiamat, the serpent of chaos, the ancient one, mother of the gods and all abominations of chaos. Exactly what Isis is doing in its terrorist form. The Egyptian god Set was originally a female deity and was identified with Isis. Set is a god of the desert, storms and foreigners in ancient Egyptian religion. In later myths, he's also a god of darkness and chaos, hence the connection with the Sumerian Tiamat, the serpent of chaos. It says Bible scholars often associate the dragon with the devil. Can't think why. And we find Isis has morphed into Typhoon, which means terrible mother, also associated with the dragon. The Sumerian Tiamat, who is the serpent of chaos, could be to some the equivalent of what they may call the devil, and this would be where we later would get the Egyptian connection to the goddess in Egypt, Isis. They did terrible things and are associated with serpents, darkness, and chaos. And Isis became a powerful deity of the late Egyptian dynasties of the Greeks and the Romans, which a lot of this symbolism came out of. They use a lot of Roman symbolism, a lot of Greek symbolism, a lot of Egyptian symbolism, because basically it's a progression of the same thing to present day. And it says you'll find Cleopatra had always appeared in public clothed in a robe sacred to Isis, and magic, her central role as the goddess of darkness and chaos, we know as our current world, and we certainly know as the current situation in the Middle East, and particularly Iraq. So once again, we're watching a movie. The movie is playing out on the television news, and we don't have journalists most of the time. We have movie correspondents. They're basically just writing articles about a movie. And what they want us to believe is that this is a spontaneous outgrowth from this Al-Qaeda, and that they are, through their own devices and through their own motivation, seeking to impose an extreme Islamic state on that entire area of the Middle East, including Israel. I mean, where's that going to end, for goodness sake? And that all their funding, all their organization, all their state-of-the-art social media is all coming spontaneously from them. It's not. It's another front which allows you to create a terrorist group, fund it, arm it, and train it, but in public condemn it while you control it. And when it does the dastardly deeds that you are orchestrating it to do, you can then reach a point where you say, we can't stand by and let this happen any longer. We must intervene. And what they want is the situation by then to be so bad that the current public hostility to more intervention, as was seen when they tried to get agreement to bomb Syria, that they will so get it to an extreme point that they will break down that public resistance to more military intervention. That's where we're going. And that military intervention is designed to be the trigger for World War III. And so we can buy the lie, or we can choose to see through it. And how many do one and how many do the other will be very, very significant, because this is a very, very significant moment. I mean, I've been following the story and this unfolding agenda for a long, long time. And I'll say this is a very significant moment that we're witnessing now. It is the start of another stage, upping the ante and ratcheting up the situation of seeking to trigger World War III, which is designed to transform the world from even what it is now in terms of freedom into a global fascist dictatorship. So these are interesting times, as the Chinese say, and it will be very interesting to see how this unfolds in the next few days and weeks. Anyway, that's it. I hope you've got something out of it in terms of the background to what's currently happening. All around me here are organizations involved in high-tech research into transhumanism, into space technology, and all that whole area of cutting-edge research, at least cutting-edge in the public arena. And I've come here to the Singularity University because it sounds kind of nondescript and nothing of great importance to humanity, but it is, because among the people who created this Singularity University is Ray Kurzweil, one of the great PR men for Frankenstein and the transhumanist nightmare. And the whole agenda is for humanity to have technology put inside the body, inside the brain, nanotechnology in the end, which you can even breathe in. We call it smart dust and nanobots and various other names. And that this technology will connect the human mind to what I've been writing about for years and called the technological sub-reality. But the people like Kurzweil, who set up this Singularity University with others, they call this technological sub-reality the cloud. And they say that humans will be connected to the cloud by 2030, which is no time from now, really. Or at least it will start then. And that we will then, this is Kurzweil's words, we will then think from the cloud. There'll be, as he puts it, gateways in the cloud to our brains. And more, as time passes, you will have a situation where the cloud, he says, will do more and more of human thinking until it does human thinking in its entirety. So what we're looking at behind this whole agenda is the complete hijacking of the human conscious mind and immediate subconscious mind by those that control the cloud, and that will be artificial intelligence, which will, of course, have the agenda that it is programmed, or it chooses to have, if you go really deep into this nature of what AI really is. And they're being open about it because they're trying to sell it as making people superhuman. We are seeing this constant sales pitch that by being connected to this cloud, this Wi-Fi sub-reality technological cloud, we will be able to do things and understand things that the human mind cannot. And in fact, the whole term singularity refers to a point where artificial intelligence becomes greater in thinking potential than human consciousness, the human conscious mind. And so what they're saying is, connect your brain, your mind, to this technological cloud, and you will be superhuman. You will be able to think like the machines can, like the AI can. Of course, it's complete nonsense, because the opposite is the case. It's not about making people superhuman. It's about making them subhuman. It's about the end of humanity as we know it, in terms of anything, even approaching free thought and free perception. Because perceptions will be coming from the cloud to the conscious mind. And the conscious mind will think, I'm having a thought. I'm going to do this. I agree with that. I'm going to support that. I'm going to oppose that. I believe this. But actually it won't be the human mind reaching those conclusions. It will be impulses from the cloud. That is the entire agenda of this transhumanist nightmare which is unfolding around us, and which the Singularity University here is pushing and pushing and pushing, and Kurzweil and co are pushing and pushing and pushing. The complete takeover of human thought, and through that human emotion. And what is happening is we're being taken down that road step by step in a very coordinated way, which appears random to most people. And it goes like this. First you get people addicted to technology they can hold. Let's call it holdables. The smartphones, the tablets, etc. And of course, look around you in any group of people anywhere in the world. Look at so many young people when you see them in groups. And the rest of the world doesn't exist much of the time. Only the screen of the smartphone exists. As the human mind becomes more and more attached in terms of focus and focus of attention upon, in effect, an expression of the cloud. And then the next stage, and we're well into that, has been to get technology on the body, because that's, of course, the next step to getting in the body. And so we have this term now, wearables. These are your smartwatches, your Bluetooth, your Google Glass, etc. So get the technology now out of the hand and onto the body in a way where you actually wear it through the day. And what we're already seeing is the next stage, and the stage they've been manipulating humanity into from the start, and that is implantables, where technology is put inside the body. And this is the technology that is designed to be connected to the cloud and thus take over human thinking. So in this NASA research park, so much will be going on so many levels, in so many technological areas, to advance this agenda of the technological control of the human mind. Whether it's the Singularity University here pushing this transhumanist nightmare, or whether it's putting satellites up to beam Wi-Fi to the entire planet. Because of course, if you're going to connect everyone to this cloud, this technological subconscious mind is what they plan it to be for humanity, then you have to have Wi-Fi everywhere, and that is what is happening. And names that are connected to this, people might not think of. Google's a search engine, right? Google's there to help you find what you want on the internet. Well, actually, it's more than that. Facebook, all these are just down the road from here in Silicon Valley. Facebook is just a way of keeping up with your friends and sharing your information and what's happening to you, right? No, it's much more than that. So this is the Singularity University. Now let's have a look at Google. So here we are, just a few miles down the freeway at Google in Silicon Valley. And it's kind of appropriate how close it was to that NASA research area and the Singularity University. Because, as I was saying, people think of Google primarily as a search engine on the internet, which first of all gives it enormous power because of its domination of the search engine arena. Because through algorithm codes and other technology and methods, they can manipulate the stories that appear most prominently on their search engine lists. So, for instance, it's possible to favour a candidate in a presidential election, and there's been a number of stories around the internet in the current election campaign between Hillary Clinton and Donald Trump, suggesting that their research tells them that Hillary Clinton has been emphasized, and bad things about Hillary Clinton have been suppressed in terms of their the ability to find them on Google. So the potential's there to manipulate information
by its domination of the search engine potential of people going on the internet. But it's far more than that, because Google is one of the prime drivers of this transhumanist agenda, in league with an organization that it works very closely with, called DARPA. And DARPA is the technological development arm of the Pentagon. This is the organization, one of the most sinister on earth, that develops things like death rays and ever more effective ways of killing people and controlling people with surveillance technology and mind manipulation technology. And this combination of DARPA and Google is at the forefront of pushing this transhumanist agenda, articulated by people like Ray Kurzweil and his Singularity University. And Ray Kurzweil just happens to be an executive of Google. He is called their chief futurist, or something like that. And you then start to see explanations for what apparently are strange happenings. Some years ago, a lady called Regina Duggan, who was the head and director of DARPA, suddenly made a strange career move on the face of it. She moved from DARPA and became an executive of Google. But when you do the research and you realize what's going on, you see that this apparently strange career move from the technological development arm of the Pentagon to a search engine organization was actually, in effect, an interdepartmental transfer, because Google are fundamentally involved in so many areas in this transhumanist agenda. They, for instance, took over a company called Boston Dynamics, which is one of the prime organizations, a very prominent organization in the development of machines and robots controlled by artificial intelligence. And they are under contract to DARPA. And this combination is extremely important to understand in relation to this agenda for the control of the human mind by attaching the human mind to a technological sub-reality, this cloud that they talk about. And also what's being developed is a robot army. I've been talking for years about the fact that the idea was to create a world army to impose the will of a world government. But it's actually one step further than that in terms of what I'm talking about here, because in the end they don't want that to be an army of humans, but an army of machines controlled by artificial intelligence, where artificial intelligence is making decisions on who to kill and who not to kill, and who to bomb and who not to bomb. And this is not me surmising and pulling it out of the ether. You're seeing this in news headlines now as these technologies come to light that are high-tech, cutting-edge military technologies controlled by artificial intelligence. And of course, in Dallas a few months ago, we had the first killing by a robot, when a robot killed someone who was claimed to have been shooting at police. So we are now in a world, an arena of sci-fi, and science fiction is supposed to be a projection into the future, coming from the imagination. But actually, science fiction is now science fact, and it's all around us. And it's being driven by organizations like the Singularity University and by Google. And what Google have done in recent times is change the name of much of their company to Alphabet. There's a reason for that, I would strongly suggest. The areas that Google is involved in, all these areas I'm talking about and more, is vastly, vastly, vastly beyond just the search engine that people know about. And Google has become such a buzzword that when people see it or hear it, it registers with them. So it's like they want to avoid the situation that was gathering, where they said Google's into this transhumanist agenda, it's doing this. What, Google's doing that? And Google's doing that? What? Google? Is that Google? Google's doing that? Because the word is so known to people, you can't hide it. So what they've done is changed the name of much of the company to this nondescript, easily forgotten, in the vast majority of minds, completely unconnected to Google, this name Alphabet. So Alphabet are doing this and Alphabet are doing that. Well, who's Alphabet? This is why it's being done. And we need to watch people like Kurzweil, the Singularity University, the Transhumanist Agenda, and organizations like Google, like a hawk, with a telescope, because we are being manipulated into literally giving our minds away to technology controlled by artificial intelligence. And then the question comes, which is what I talk about in my events around the world, among many other things: what is this artificial intelligence? Who is asking that question? Artificial intelligence is going to control this, it's controlling that, it's controlling that. So what is it? I think when you look at that question and see what artificial intelligence really is, you realize that it's more than just technology. So here we are, again, just a few miles down the road from Google and the Singularity University. I've got to shout a little bit, I think, because we're right next to a main road, which in build-up America is very, very easy to be alongside. They're everywhere. So, Facebook. Ah, the T-shirt. Cool, man. I'm one of you. Facebook, of course, is just a social media platform. That's all it is. Nothing to worry about. Except that it's more than that. And let's start off with its increasing censorship. You know, when you're building a communication platform, a communication network, where you are trawling people's private lives because they are telling you themselves what their private lives are, and when you are building a network of information communication all around the world, well, you seem at first like the good guy. So here's the T-shirt. Hey man, cool, I'm one of you. But then when you get big enough and you think powerful enough, then you start to manifest what you were really created and developed for. And that is to be not a vehicle for free flow communication of information, but to dictate what can and cannot be heard. So what we're seeing more and more with these giants of the internet, not just Facebook, but organizations like YouTube, which of course is owned by Google, is more and more censorship of information that is challenging the official version of everything, that is exposing that what we're being told through the mainstream media is simply an illusion, a pack of diversory lies and half-truths to stop us seeing what's really going on. And so, in terms of YouTube, what's appearing more and more to people who are within what's called the alternative media is that videos that they put on YouTube that were previously what they call monetized you could get advertising money from them. Now they are demonetizing videos that are in almost any way often challenging the official version of anything, particularly seriously challenging the official version of government and military and wars and terrorist attacks, because they know that so many in the alternative media get their ability to function financially from monetization of videos. So that's a very targeted effort to break down the alternative media and make it more difficult to function. Then you come to Facebook, and I know all about this myself, because so often you'll post things that question or challenge the system that are actually often quite mild, but they still get taken down, and you get banned for a week, or in some cases, for some people, banned for a month, in some cases banned altogether, for posting things that people have a right to see and hear. But because Facebook has got so massive, so powerful, it thinks it can now start to strut around and dictate what people can and cannot hear. And for me, you know, no one will ever convince me that the T-shirt, Mark Zuckerberg runs this place. No way in the world. Fronts it up, but ultimately that's not where the real power is. Because when you research this and you go deep enough into it, you find that these internet giants like Google and Facebook and so many others, YouTube of course because it's controlled by Facebook, by Google, that actually they answer to the same masters. They're part of the same web. So we're standing here, and this is a series of pretty nondescript buildings called Facebook, but that's a strand in the web, and the web is what dictates ultimately the direction and the behavior of Facebook. And then there's another strand in the web here, and it's called Google. But ultimately, it's the web that dictates the direction and behavior of Google. And so what you're looking at are different masks, if you like, on the same face, different strands in the same web. And it's that force at the center of the web, the spider, if you like, that's actually driving this agenda through all these different strands and aspects of the web. So this censorship that's going on in all these different internet platforms and expressions is actually not someone's decided here, someone's decided there. It's actually coordinated through the web. It's always going to be like that. And if you then take another look at Facebook from the transhumanist point of view, what I was saying over at the Singularity University in Google is that we have this transhumanist agenda to attach the human conscious and subconscious mind to the cloud, what Ray Kurzweil calls the cloud. And therefore the cloud, a technological, artificial intelligence generated sub-reality, would do more and more of human thinking until it was doing the totality of human thinking. They're openly saying this now. And Facebook is involved in that. As I've mentioned, if you're going to have everyone attached to a Wi-Fi based global cloud, then that has to be what has to be created is a Wi-Fi cloud that no one can get away from. A Wi-Fi technology that covers every inch of the planet. And that's what is happening. Satellites are going up there. Again, you know, all your SpaceX and all these other organizations and NASA and DARPA, they're all connected and controlled by this web, pushing the world in a certain direction. And so you'll remember that a few weeks ago, there was a rocket exploded at Cape Canaveral. And it was a rocket being tested and prepared by this organization SpaceX, which is headed by this guy Elon Musk, and he has been, again, one of the people who has said we must get technology insiders to attach us to this cloud, because if we don't, then we won't keep up with the machines, we won't keep up with the artificial intelligence. So that's just another little way of saying and providing an excuse and a reason to get people attached technologically to this cloud. But that rocket exploded before it was due to send up a satellite from Facebook that was planned to bathe the entirety of Africa in Wi-Fi. And this is what these satellites are doing, being sent up. It's to bathe the entire planet in Wi-Fi, to bathe the entire planet in the cloud, which they want through this transhumanist agenda to attach human minds to. And so this is what's unfolding before our eyes. And just moving around this Silicon Valley from place to place, by American terms, everything very close to each other, you're in the epicenter of where this whole agenda is being driven from. And we need to become aware of it, because if we don't, we will go on walking, sleepwalking into this transhumanist, the end of humans, the end of humanity as we know it, nightmare. It's time to wake up, and bloody fast.
I've been saying for decades that voting is an irrelevance. And more people are now beginning to see that simple fact. Why? Because a democratic election, a free vote, is only of any significance whatsoever if it involves choice. If you are given a list of people who are basically, all right, little detail here and there, but not much, who are basically standing on the same postage stamp, and in terms of policy and attitude and perspective and perception of reality and the world, pissing in the same pot, then that is not a choice, and thus that is not a free election when it doesn't involve choice. And we've had some T-shirts knocked up to mark this election with the only ballot paper worth having in an election, because it includes the right to vote for none of the above. And that is not rejecting your democratic right. It is actually massively using it to say, I don't support any of this list, this crap, this postage stamp. And thus you're making a statement, by the number of people that do that, of what you feel about the political system. And we don't, of course, have that on the ballot paper. It's vote for this lot, or you've got no other choice. Well, we do. Short of having none of the above on the ballot paper, we can have the right not to vote. Oh, you got to vote in a democratic election. People fought for it. Yeah. You know what they fought for? They fought for political choice, not for the choice of voting for different masks on basically the same face. And so not voting is not a cop-out, it's a statement. It's a statement of what you think about the political system and the corrupt irrelevance of it in terms of people's lives. And as more and more people understand this, we're getting more and more pressure to do what some countries already do, which is to fine people for not voting. I mean, can somebody over here, somebody explain that? This is a democratic country. It's about freedom, but we'll fine you if you don't vote. Because if you don't vote, what you're doing is removing your support and removing credibility from the corrupt, biased, controlled by the few political establishment. And so we have this waste of time called an election. And what happens is different people in little groups, some big groups, who call themselves parties, sit around a table and say, how do we get people to vote for us? And it's not based on how do we respond to what is necessary, what is just, what is right, what is fair. It's what do we have to tell them so they'll vote for us? And they produce things called manifestos saying, vote for us and this is what we'll do. And they go on the telly and they debate and they say, vote for us and this is what we'll do. But of course, history tells a rather different story. It tells a constant story of people saying, vote for us and we'll do this. And then they get into power and they don't do it. Sometimes they do the bloody opposite. Why? Because there's no contract. There's no contract between politicians and political parties and the public. You know, if you buy a washing machine or a Hoover or whatever, there is a contract. What you buy, you must receive, otherwise you're breaking the bloody law. And there's a contract. I'll pay you this for that, but that has got to be what I've agreed to pay you for. Now, of course, in politics, it can't be that black and white because of events, but there are clear society-changing policies that should actually be in a contract between the public and the political parties and the politicians that say, look, if we say we'll do this, we'll do this. If we say we won't do this, we won't do this. Classic example: the government or the government during an election, the party of government during an election said in Australia, "You vote for us, we will not introduce a carbon tax." And then, of course, the opposition parties were saying they're going to introduce a carbon tax. That's outrageous. That is a slur. We'll never introduce a carbon tax. What did they do when they got into government? Introduced a carbon tax. That's a classic example of what I mean by there needs to be a contract. Where you say you're going to do this, that's a contract. That's a contract policy. We will do it or we won't do it depending on what we're saying. And then at least people have some kind of greater confidence that what this bloke in the rosette or this lady in a rosette is saying they will or will not do will or will not happen. But that's nowhere near the case. What happens is they say, this is what we're going to do. And then they get into office and they do what they were going to do all along. And when you are moving, irrespective of which major parties in power, towards what I call the Hunger Games society, with a tiny, tiny elite of less than 1%, never mind 1%, controlling all the wealth and all the imposition of society through a police state, leaving the masses, including those that call themselves middle class and well off today, if they're not part of the 1%, as a mass slave society, classically symbolized in the Hunger Games movies, and so many others that have come out in the last 10 years or so. Then what would happen if these political leaders were honest and said, actually, what we're going to do is move us closer and closer to this society, more and more laws, more and more control, more and more deletion of prosperity for the general population? Of course, they wouldn't get in. So they sit around and say, how do we tell people what they want to hear so they vote for us, because then when we get in, we can do what we were going to do all along. This is the political system. And by voting, people are giving their energy, giving their credence, giving credibility to an uncredible, corrupt, and mendacious to its bone marrow political system. So we have a situation where not one single party, not one, I don't care if it's the Greens or We're Alternative and all that stuff, not one is addressing the most obvious, the most blatant, and the most, in general society terms, crucial aspect of what is happening in the world and what has happened for so long. And that is that private banks can create money out of nothing called credit, where they can lend 10 times and more the money they actually have on deposit in loans. That they can create this money out of fresh air, like I say, called credit, and charge interest on it. And if the people can't pay back the interest and the principal, not least because of economic crises and crashes caused by the same banking system that's doing this, then for that fresh air credit, which has cost the banks nothing, for that, the banks can then take your wealth that does exist. It can take your home, it can take your car, it can take your business, it can take your land, and so on. And this is the process of controlling the monetary system and the very creation of money, so that you then, through that control of money, control people's creativity and whether they can express that creativity. You decide if they have a home or don't have a home, if they have a job or don't have a job, and in the end, whether they live or whether they don't. And it's all based, that control is all based on allowing private corporations, banks, to bring in the overwhelmingly vast majority of